get ready to power up your productivity because today we're taking a deep dive into some would you rather scenarios all about maximizing how much you get done.
I love that. A deep dive into productivity and using the fun would you rather format from the Guess That Right channel.
Exactly. And I love their videos because they really make you think about the choices we make every single day and how those choices affect our productivity.
It's so true. Sometimes the simplest questions, like would you rather, can actually unlock these profound insights about ourselves and how we work best.
Okay, so let's jump right in. This first would you rather dilemma goes straight to the heart of work styles. Would you rather use the Pomodoro technique to power through your tasks or settle into a steady rhythm of work without those structured breaks?
I think it's fascinating how this one simple choice can reveal so much about how our brains are wired. Some people thrive on that burst and recover cycle of the Pomodoro technique.
Right.
And they might actually have brain chemistry that is really set up for those short bursts of intense focus.
So it's like they get that dopamine hit with every completed interval, and that just fuels their motivation to keep going.
Exactly. It's like a built-in reward system for their brains.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I've tried Pomodoro before, and some days, you're right, it feels like I have a superpower, but other days, it feels like it completely disrupts my flow.
And that's why understanding your own natural tendencies is so crucial. Now, for people who prefer that steady work approach, they might find that getting into a deep flow state is more their style.
Right, where they can kind of lose track of time and get completely absorbed in what they're doing.
Exactly. But even for those people, they need to be mindful of burnout because it's kind of like a muscle.
Yeah.
Even the most enduring focus can fatigue without proper rest.
So, besides trial and error, how can we figure out which approach might work best for us?
I think a great starting point is to pay attention to your energy levels throughout the day.
Okay, so notice if you naturally take breaks every hour or so.
Yes. Or if you tend to kind of hyper-focus for longer stretches and then crash.
That's a good point. I know I definitely have those days where I just get in the zone and hours go by.
Right. And it's also important to think about the type of task you're working on. So sometimes a complex project that requires a lot of deep thinking might actually benefit from that steady work approach.
That makes sense. But maybe those smaller, more routine tasks could be perfect for those Pomodoro bursts.
Precisely.
Okay, so matching the technique to both our personal style and the type of work we're doing, that's a great takeaway for our listeners.
Absolutely. Now, the next would you rather takes us into the world of workspace design. So this one asks, would you rather work in a minimalist haven of focus or surround yourself with cozy decor and personal touches?
Ooh, that's a good one. I can already see how this one taps into some interesting psychology.
It really does. So a minimalist workspace, stripped down to just the essentials, it's all about eliminating distractions.
Yeah, and creating that sense of calm focus.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But some people actually find that environment a little bit too sterile.
Yeah.
Almost like working in a lab.
Oh, I can totally see that. I actually tried to go super minimal with my desk once, and I just ended up feeling uninspired.
Really?
Yeah, it was like I had sucked all the personality out of my work.
Exactly. And that's where that cozy, personalized space comes in.
Yeah.
Surrounding yourself with things that bring you joy. Things like photos, plants, maybe even a comfy armchair.
Oh, yeah.
That can actually create a sense of comfort and boost your mood. And that can actually translate into better productivity.
It's like you're creating a little sanctuary where you actually want to spend time.
Right, exactly. But of course, there's a potential downside because too much clutter or overly stimulating decor can become a distraction in itself.
Oh, absolutely. I've definitely fallen into that trap before.
So it's all about finding that sweet spot.
Right, a space that feels personally inspiring but also helps you focus. So maybe it's not so much about minimalist versus cozy, but more about intentional versus distracting when it comes to designing our workspace.
You hit the nail on the head. It's about curating a space that supports your work style and keeps you energized without pulling your attention away from what matters.
I love that. Now, this next would you rather throws a curveball at us. Would you rather tackle the hardest task first thing in the morning or start your day by knocking out a few easier wins?
Ah, the classic eat the frog dilemma.
I was going to say.
This one often comes down to personality and how you personally manage your energy levels.
Okay, so break this down for me. Eat the frog. I've heard the phrase, but honestly, I've never really understood it. Why a frog?
Okay, so think of it this way. If you had to eat a live frog every day.
Oh, that's a horrible thought.
Yeah. Wouldn't you want to get it over with first thing in the morning? That's the idea.
Okay.
By facing your most daunting task head on, you kind of eliminate that feeling of dread that can linger in the back of your mind all day.
And it frees up your mental energy for the rest of your tasks. Okay, that actually makes a lot of sense. But I know I've definitely fallen into the trap of procrastinating on those big, scary tasks.
Well, we all have. And that's why that easier wins approach can be so appealing, right? Because it's all about building momentum early on by completing tasks that require less mental energy.
So it's like warming up before a workout.
Exactly. You wouldn't just jump into a heavy lifting session without kind of preparing your muscles first.
Okay, I like that analogy. But the problem I see with that is that you might get so caught up in those easier wins that you end up pushing the harder tasks even further down the line.
Exactly. And that leads to last-minute stress.
So it seems like both approaches have their own pros and cons. How can our listeners decide which strategy might be the best fit for them?
I think a good starting point is to think about your own energy patterns. So are you a morning person? You know someone who feels super alert and focused early in the day?
If you are, then eating the frog might be a good strategy for you.
Right. But if you tend to hit your stride a little bit later, maybe starting with those easier tasks to build momentum might be a better fit.
And honestly, maybe it's even a matter of just experimenting with both approaches and seeing what feels most productive for different types of tasks.
Absolutely. It's all about finding that personalized balance.
Because sometimes even the frog might feel less daunting once you've gotten a few smaller wins under your belt.
Exactly.
Speaking of feeling overwhelmed, let's talk about distractions.
Oh, yes.
This next would you rather scenario hits close to home for me. It asks, would you rather have your phone automatically block distracting apps during work hours or rely on those gentle reminders to stay focused?
This one's a classic battle between external control and self-discipline.
Yeah.
Having your phone automatically block those tempting apps is like having a digital bodyguard for your attention.
It's like putting all those distractions in a timeout corner.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But for some people, that level of control can actually feel a little restrictive.
I get that.
Even anxiety-inducing.
It's almost like having your phone taken away. Even if you know it's for your own good, it can still trigger that feeling of like, oh, I'm missing out.
Right, and that's where those gentle reminders come in. It's just a little nudge from a friend, like, hey, remember what you're supposed to be doing.
And it's a good way to practice self-awareness because you're not totally cutting yourself off from those apps.
Right.
But you're training yourself to be more intentional about how and when you use them.
Exactly. It's all about finding a system that aligns with your personality.
So if you know you're someone who really struggles with self-control, those automatic blockers might be a really helpful crutch, at least initially. But if you're more self-disciplined and you prefer a gentler approach, those reminders can be great for just staying on track without feeling restricted.
Perfectly said. It's all about understanding your own tendencies and finding that system that supports rather than sabotages your productivity.
Okay, it's time for our last would you rather scenario before we wrap up this first part of our deep dive. And this one's all about celebrating our wins. So would you rather savor those major milestones or celebrate every little victory along the way?
This one's fascinating because it really gets into the psychology of motivation and how we reward ourselves.
It's a question that a lot of people struggle with,
Right.
especially in today's world.
Absolutely.
So walk me through this. What's the thinking behind breaking down big goals into smaller, more achievable milestones?
Well, it's all about creating those mini victories that keep you motivated and build that momentum along the way. Imagine you're training for a marathon.
Okay.
If you only focused on crossing that finish line 26.2 miles away, the journey might feel incredibly overwhelming, almost impossible. But if you break it down into smaller milestones, like running a certain number of miles each week, completing your first 10K, and so on,
Oh yeah.
you're creating that sense of accomplishment, that sense of progress. That keeps you going.
It's like giving yourself those little rewards along the way. That's a great analogy, and it makes so much sense because I find that when I break down a big, daunting task into smaller chunks, it feels a lot less overwhelming. You actually feel like you're making progress, even if you haven't reached the final goal yet.
Exactly. And those small celebrations along the way provide this positive reinforcement, and that can be such a powerful motivator.
But what about those people who find that too many celebrations are actually distracting?
Ooh, that's a good point.
They disrupt their flow.
Yeah.
Is there a benefit to focusing solely on that one major goal and just feeling the satisfaction of achieving that?
Absolutely. For some people, that delayed gratification, that moment of triumph when they finally achieve that long sought after goal is the ultimate reward.
I can see how that would be really motivating for certain personalities.
Yes.
But the challenge might be maintaining that drive and focus over time, especially if it's a really long journey.
That's true. And this is why self-awareness is so crucial. If you're someone who thrives on those frequent rewards and needs that constant sense of progress to stay motivated, breaking down those goals into those smaller milestones might be a more effective strategy for you.
Right.
But if you're someone who can stay focused on that big picture and finds immense satisfaction in achieving those major milestones, then go for it.
So it's all about understanding what motivates you personally.
Exactly.
And then tailoring your approach accordingly.
I think that's a great overarching message for our listeners to take away from these would you rather dilemmas.
Yeah.
There's no one-size-fits-all solution when it comes to productivity. It's about discovering what works best for you, your personality, and your unique work style.
This has been such a thought-provoking start to our deep dive. We've already covered so much ground, from work styles and workspace design to tackling tough tasks and celebrating those wins.
We have.
Before we move on to part 2 of this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with this question. What resonated most with you from these first few dilemmas? And what's one small change you might try implementing this week based on what we've talked about so far?
We'll be back in just a moment to explore even more productivity power-ups from your second Would You Rather video. So grab a notepad, stay tuned, and get ready for even more insights.
All right, welcome back to our productivity deep dive. We're jumping right back into those Would You Rather scenarios from the Guess I Right channel. Ready for round 2?
Absolutely. Let's unlock some more productivity secrets.
All right, this next one asks, would you rather have the flexibility of unpredictable tasks and a shifting schedule, or the stability of a fixed schedule with clearly defined tasks?
Ooh, this is such a relevant one, especially in today's work world.
Hey.
It really highlights how much things are changing.
Yeah, I was just thinking that.
The traditional 9 to 5, with its predictable routine, that's becoming less and less common.
It's so true. More and more people are embracing that flexible work from anywhere lifestyle.
Exactly. But it's definitely not for everyone.
No, not at all.
While some people thrive on that freedom and adaptability, others really crave the structure and predictability of a fixed schedule.
It can be so reassuring to know exactly what your day is going to look like.
Right, and to have that clear separation between work time and personal time.
So if you're someone who loves variety and can easily adjust to shifting priorities, maybe even enjoys a bit of spontaneity in your workday, that flexible approach might be a perfect fit.
Absolutely. But if routine is your thing and you need that clear boundary between work and life, if you prefer knowing what's expected of you each day, then a fixed schedule might be a better way to go.
It seems like with so many of these productivity choices, self-awareness is key.
It really is. Knowing how you best manage your time and energy can help you figure out which work style will actually help you focus better and ultimately be more productive. Okay, are you ready for a slightly more, whimsical dilemma?
Hit me with it.
This one asks, would you rather have to sing every task you're doing out loud or dance every time you complete something?
Okay, that is definitely whimsical. It seems like this one is less about a strict productivity hack and more about just injecting some fun and energy into our workday.
I think you're spot on.
Yeah.
And even though it's not a traditional productivity technique, it actually touches on something really important.
What's that?
Bringing playfulness and movement into our work can actually boost our mood, our creativity, and yes, even our productivity.
I've totally noticed that. Sometimes when I'm feeling stuck, I'll put on some music and just dance for a few minutes. It really helps me shift my energy.
Exactly. And as silly as it might sound to sing our tasks out loud, it can be a fun way to engage different parts of our brain and make even those boring, mundane tasks a little bit more fun. Plus, who doesn't love a little impromptu karaoke session, even if it's just with yourself?
I'd probably need a private office for that one. I don't think my coworkers would appreciate me belting out tunes during a meeting.
Right.
But I do like the idea of a little celebratory dance after a successful presentation.
I love that. It's all about finding those ways to celebrate those wins and bring a little joy into your work.
This actually reminds me of a time when I was working on this really challenging project, and I promised myself a little dance party after I hit every major milestone.
Oh, I love that.
It really helped to keep me motivated and made the whole process feel a lot less stressful.
Such a good reminder that making work feel less like, work can really impact our productivity.
Speaking of rewards, this next Would You Rather takes us back to the idea of celebrating our wins. It asks, would you rather break down large goals into smaller milestones to celebrate along the way, or focus solely on the satisfaction of achieving that one major goal?
Ooh, that's a good one. It really comes down to understanding what motivates you.
All right, so explain this one to me. What's the benefit of breaking down those big goals into smaller, more achievable milestones?
It's all about creating those mini victories that keep you motivated and build that momentum along the way. Imagine you're training for a marathon. If you only focused on crossing the finish line, that 26.2 miles away, it might feel impossible. But if you break it down into smaller goals, running a certain number of miles each week, finishing your first 10K race, and so on, you're constantly creating that sense of accomplishment. And that keeps you going.
I love that analogy. I find that for me, breaking down a big, daunting task into smaller, more manageable chunks really helps me avoid feeling overwhelmed. Like I'm actually making progress, even if I haven't reached that ultimate goal yet.
Exactly. And those small celebrations along the way, they provide this positive reinforcement, which, we all know how powerful that can be. It's like giving yourself a pat on the back for each step you take.
Okay, so what about those people who find that celebrating too much can be distracting or disrupt their flow?
That's a great point.
Is there a benefit to just staying laser focused on that one major goal?
Absolutely. For some people, that delayed gratification, that moment of triumph when they finally achieve that big goal, that is the ultimate reward. It's like the grand finale of a fireworks show.
I can see how that would be really motivating. But the challenge, it seems, is maintaining that drive throughout the entire journey, especially if it's a long one.
That's so true. And it all comes back to knowing yourself. If you thrive on those frequent rewards and need that constant sense of progress, breaking things down is probably better for you. But if you're someone who can just stay laser focused on that big picture and loves developing those major milestones, then go for it.
So no right or wrong answer here. It just depends on what works for you.
Exactly.
And I think that's such a great takeaway for our listeners from all of these would you rather dilemmas.
Right.
There's no one right way to be productive.
Right.
It's about finding what works for you, your personality, and your own unique work style.
I love that. And just like with any skill, it takes practice, it takes experimentation, and a willingness to kind of adapt your approach as you go.
As we wrap up this part 2 of our deep dive, I want our listeners to think about these scenarios.
Yes.
Which approaches really resonated with you? And what's one small change you might try to incorporate into your work life this week to boost your productivity?
We'll be back in just a moment to wrap up this entire deep dive and leave you with one final thought-provoking question. All right, we're back for the final part of our productivity deep dive. We've explored a ton of strategies using these would you rather scenarios. From how we work to where we work, to actually tackling those tasks and celebrating our wins, no matter how big or small.
I know. It's been amazing to see how even the simplest choices can really highlight what we prefer and what really motivates us to get things done.
It really is.
Yeah?
But as we wrap things up, I'm curious about those times when we think we have all the right productivity hacks in place, the perfect workspace, the color-coded to-do list, even those celebratory dance moves ready to go, but we still just feel stuck. What is that? That's such a good point. I think we often focus so much on the external stuff, like the tools and techniques and the environment, that we forget about the most important part.
Our mindset.
Exactly. It's like having this super high-performance race car, but with a flat tire.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how fancy the design or how powerful the engine is, you're not going anywhere until you fix that tire.
Exactly. So when it comes to productivity, that flat tire is often our own thoughts.
Absolutely. Those limiting beliefs, that negative self-talk, all that can sabotage our efforts before we even get started.
Yeah. So even if we've got the Pomodoro technique down pat and our workspace is like a Zen garden, we might still struggle if we're constantly telling ourselves, I'm not good enough, or I'll never get this done.
It's like trying to run a race, but with an anchor tied to your ankle. Those negative thoughts, they create this cycle of procrastination and overwhelm, and in the end, we don't perform as well as we could.
So how do we even start to shift that mindset? How do we become more aware of those self-sabotaging thoughts and replace them with ones that actually help us?
That's where self-compassion comes in. It's all about treating yourself with the same kindness and understanding that you would offer a good friend who's going through something similar.
Okay, so instead of beating ourselves up for making mistakes, we offer ourselves encouragement, we acknowledge our efforts, and we remind ourselves that it's okay to not be perfect.
Yes, and remember, Self-compassion doesn't mean lowering your standards or making excuses.
Right.
It's about creating a supportive environment internally that allows you to actually grow and thrive.
So it's like being your own cheerleader, celebrating those wins, offering support when you face setbacks, and just constantly reminding yourself that you're capable of achieving great things.
Exactly. And when you cultivate that sense of self-compassion, it becomes much easier to face challenges, to bounce back from setbacks, and ultimately to be more productive without sacrificing your own well-being.
This has been such an amazing conversation. We've really covered it all, from those practical tips and techniques to the deeper psychological aspects of productivity.
And I think the biggest takeaway for our listeners today is that true productivity goes beyond just checking things off a to-do list. It's about creating a life that feels good. The life that feels meaningful and aligned with what matters most to you.
And that takes more than just mastering some external strategies. It's about cultivating a mindset that actually supports your growth, your well-being, and ultimately your success.
So as you continue on your own productivity journey, just remember to be kind to yourself, enjoy the process, and never underestimate just how much you can achieve.
And that's a wrap on another episode of The Deep Dive.
Yes.
We hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into all things productivity.
We hope you feel inspired to create a more fulfilling and productive life.
We'll see you next time, ready to dive into something new.
Until then, keep exploring, keep experimenting, and most importantly, keep believing in yourself.